Apparently, Ellen DeGeneres was speaking to Howard Stern about an interview that she did with Caitlyn Jenner. Now, Ellen actually came to a pretty interesting revelation about Caitlyn Jenner and how she feels about the gay community. Here's what Ellen said to Howard Stern. She basically said that she was talking to Caitlyn Jenner and realized that maybe she wasn't in favor of the gay community. I said, you're wanting people to understand and accept you. This is like really confusing to people, and you still have a judgment about gay people and marriage. She goes, well, if the word marriage is that important, it is. That's the word. We want the same thing. So I don't really understand how that exchange went down. I haven't heard the interview between Ellen and Caitlyn Jenner yet.
Classical TYT research. Instead of watching the interview themselves, they will just take somebody else's interpretation of it for granted. So before we continue with Anna's take on Caitlyn Jenner's comment, let's watch the original clip. It'll only take a minute. I'm talking to you, Anna.
I know you're very conservative, and you have been very conservative. You've said you're Republican, and
is that a bad thing?
No, it's not.
Right. It's not a bad thing. It's just a different thing. I'm not a conservative, but I do understand why other people are.
Gay marriage, I have to admit that I remember 15 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it was when this whole gay marriage issue came up. At first, I was not for it. I mean, I thought, I'm a traditionalist. I'm older than most people in the audience, you know. I mean, I kind of like tradition, and, you know, it's always been a man and a woman. And I'm thinking, I don't quite get it. But as time has gone on, I think like a lot of people on this issue have really changed your thinking here to I don't ever want to stand in front of anybody's happiness.
I think that's fair. She hadn't given the issue of same-sex marriage much thought in the past, then she started thinking about it and changed her mind. That's what happens. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
If that word marriage is really, really that important to you, I can go with it, you know? And
it's funny because you're still kind of a little not on board with it.
No, I'm on board. I mean, it is going to be pretty much the law of the land.
Right.
So I still feel like, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I don't want to stand in front of somebody's happiness.
Right.
So she is on board with same-sex marriage. She just doesn't celebrate it because she's a traditionalist. Not very progressive, obviously, but she doesn't claim to be a progressive. However, she doesn't want to prevent other people from having the right to marry. She doesn't want to stand in front of anybody's happiness. I can only see one minor issue with that statement. She does make it sound like it's just a matter of words. Gays want it to be called marriage, okay, then call it marriage. But there are legal inequalities between heterosexual couples and homosexual ones, and those are the point. Anyway, let's continue.
Everybody wants to have a partner. Everybody would love to have a family. And for trans people, sometimes that could be extraordinarily difficult to do.
Right.
And so it is an issue that's big in the community. For me, I'm at such a different place in life. I already have too many children. Just kidding. Just kidding, you know. But, I mean, I have 10 children. I've got my 8th grandchild in the oven.
I just wanted to show that clip because I think that thing about her having too many children is hilarious.
Now, I want to be as honest and open about what went down as possible.
Without watching a 1-minute clip.
And based on my read of the interview, it didn't seem like she was like aggressively against the gay community.
Yeah, no, I don't think she is.
Yeah, so let me give you another example of what Caitlyn Jenner said. She said, I don't ever want to stand in front of anybody's happiness. That's not my job. If the word marriage is really, really that important to you, I can go with it. So it kind of seems like more of a concession as opposed to a supportive stance toward the gay community. And yeah, I have a problem with that.
Because you are a progressive. I would argue that her statement was supportive. She just, didn't celebrate same-sex marriage. Making a concession isn't a bad thing. It's what we do in a free society. I, for example, support freedom of religion. I'm not religious myself, I think religions are wrong, but I don't wish to infringe on other people's personal beliefs as long as they don't infringe on the rights of others. act only according to that maxim, whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law without contradiction.
But there have been a few instances where Caitlyn Jenner's conservative Republican side comes out.
Ew.
And people are kind of shocked by it because they're like, well, you're transgender and
that prevents you from having an opinion that's not in line with your sexual orientation. This is so ignorant that it makes me cringe. You see, people have this thing called free will, which means they can transcend their own selfish needs and form an opinion that may seem counterintuitive.
And you're now going to face a lot of discrimination, a lot of bigotry, so why can't you extend the same type of empathy to the gay community, right? Or even the poor community, because she said some pretty negative things about governmental programs that help the poor and things like that.
Yes, because she's a conservative. Why would you expect every transsexual to be left-wing? Do you think that having a pair of boobs and lacking a pair of pears makes a person a proponent of welfare programs? I think that's bigoted. Transsexuality has nothing to do with the issue of social welfare.
Recently, she was interviewed by Ellen, and during the interview, she said that she has like some uncomfortable feelings about same-sex marriage.
I can't take that.
Really?
Yeah. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
It's kind of incredible that she thinks that way, especially considering, first of all, she comes from an extremely privileged background.
I ask you to remember that statement.
So coming out as a transgender individual, of course, is still a very courageous thing to do, but she had certain resources at her disposal that made it a little easier for her, right?
Okay, so Anna is making the case that Caitlyn Jenner is coming from a very privileged background, and that's why her coming out as transgender isn't that courageous. I mean, it's still courageous, sure, but mind the word but. Anna stressing Caitlyn Jenner's privileged background makes it clear that her background takes away from her courage. But what certain resources are we talking about exactly? I think I'll let Anna explain herself. Here she is a few weeks earlier.
The ESPY Awards happened, and of course, the biggest news story coming from the awards was the fact that Caitlyn Jenner won the Arthur Ashe Award for Courage. Now, if you saw the speech, you already know that it was pretty inspirational and very courageous for her to go up there and talk about her struggles and also what it means for her to go through her transition in a very public way.
So Caitlyn Jenner being a public figure didn't help. Okay, let's continue.
So, as I watched that speech, I have to be honest, I did get pretty emotional.
You always get emotional.
It's a really difficult thing to do. And keep in mind that this is her first public speaking engagement after her transition.
Again, Anna is reaffirming that being a public figure doesn't make Caitlyn Jenner's coming out any easier. Then Cenk continues.
And I don't want to overdo it. I'm not saying she is Martin Luther King. I want everybody to calm down, okay? But Martin Luther King had a great quote about, he said, look, we're not going down to Selma, Alabama, and all these Mississippi and all these places in the South just to help black people in this country. We want to liberate the white people in the South from the hatred that's in their hearts, okay?
That's very powerful.
And we want to set them free, and we want to help make them more moral, decent people. Mm-hmm. I'm sure the people they were battling didn't perceive it as such, but it turned out to be true. Mm-hmm. He did liberate a lot of people in this country, not just in the South, and certainly not just black people, but he got it to a point where people started to see everybody as equal and as human beings, and that liberated us all. So when she talks about how, look, it doesn't just help trans people, it helps create a more empathetic community, which helps us all, I think she's absolutely right about that. So I thought it was a great speech.
I think that's a good point made by Cenk. Kept that in because I don't hate TYT.
I know a lot of people are mad because they view her as part of the Kardashian clan and she shouldn't have gotten this award.
The Kardashians being incredibly famous and rich people, so Caitlyn Jenner's privilege doesn't seem to be that she's rich either.
I don't get it. She's one of the most famous athletes of my lifetime. It's not like she's a minor athlete. It wasn't like she played minor league baseball.
She won the gold medal in the Olympics in 1976.
She's a gold owner, she's rich, and Anna doesn't perceive that as privilege.
Did she have courage? I just don't understand people questioning it.
First of all, I agree with you. I don't understand the people questioning it.
Then Cenk quotes Frank Deford, a sports writer.
He says, I can understand and sympathize with the torment Bruce Jenner has endured all these years, but I don't think it rises to the level of courage.
Are you serious
I
right
mean,
now?
that's fucking crazy. Look, I don't mind Frank Deford. I like Frank Deford, but you're 1,000% wrong. You think it's easy to come out as transgendered and transition from a man to a woman, especially when you were this famous and was known for something else before?
No.
Of course it takes courage. Of course. How could you say that?
It's not even that he is a public figure who, or she at this point, right? But someone who is a male public figure who is now coming out as a woman, right? It goes even further than that. Bruce Jenner was the definition of masculinity.
Right. So her being or having been a man didn't help either.
But she had certain resources at her disposal that made it a little easier for her, right?
I still don't know what privilege you are talking about. Based on previous cases, I'll just assume that you are talking about white privilege. White privilege. The benefits people receive simply by being part of the dominant group. I think that concept is wrong. I think that minorities can and do have certain disadvantages in our society, but not having this or that specific disadvantage doesn't make you privileged. Let's look at the non-sociological definition of the word privilege. Privilege. A right, immunity or benefit enjoyed only by a person beyond the advantages of most. So not all whites can be privileged. A special right, immunity or exemption granted to persons in authority or office to free them from certain obligations or liabilities, a grant to an individual, corporation, etc. for a special right or immunity under certain conditions. The principle or condition of enjoying special rights or immunities, I mean, white people do go to prison, so yeah. Any of the rights common to all citizens under a modern constitutional government, which means everyone enjoys that right as long as he or she is a citizen, an advantage or source of pleasure granted to a person, like in "It's my privilege to be here on YouTube." Stock exchange, an option to buy or sell, yeah, okay, blah 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 blah. They are constantly redefining words. Check your privilege because we redefined the word and now you are privileged just because of your ethnicity. Your parents couldn't afford to pay your student loan, you don't enjoy affirmative action due to your ethnicity and have to work in a convenience store instead. Check your privilege. Case closed. This is what annoys me with the progressive left. They will celebrate a person for one thing and bash them for the next thing. People who questioned Caitlyn Jenner's courage a few weeks ago were bigots in their eyes. Now she has made a mildly conservative statement and all of a sudden she is privileged and not quite that courageous. Their problem is that she isn't a progressive. They are so convinced that their ideology is the best thing ever for everybody that they cannot accept the apostate. In their eyes, conservative views must be some sort of character flaw. It's like when they call an African American an Uncle Tom for being a Republican.
David Webb is a Tea Party radio host. He apparently gets paid to be the Uncle Tom of the conservative movement. Now there's several of these.
And I disagree with that. I think it's disrespectful and borderline racist to deny a person the right to be a conservative on the grounds of his ethnicity. But back to the story, I think it's disrespectful and borderline sexist to deny a person the right to be conservative on the grounds of his or her sexuality. I understand that you might be surprised Caitlyn Jenner is a conservative, because yes, the Republican Party does tend to be this and that phobic. But who is she supposed to vote for if she's a conservative? Being a Republican doesn't make you a bad person. She does support same-sex marriage. But you are annoyed that she just isn't passionate enough about it. That woman on the right, she doesn't seem passionate enough about the death of our dear leader. I sometimes feel like there is a cultural revolution happening within TYT, and the comparably sensible ones are getting swept over and drowned by the younger social justice warriors. But seriously, I believe that homosexuality isn't only a form of sexuality that deserves to be accepted. I think it is a form of mutual love that deserves to be respected. And yes, I know that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here.
And remember, homosexuality is not just a form of sex, it's a form of love. They died. Oh, that's interesting. I wondered what kind of a growl I might get there. Well, I'll repeat it then. Homosexuals practice not just a form of sex, but a form of love. If you can't live with it, I think you're the poorer.
I'm not going to demonize everybody that doesn't agree with me or doesn't agree enough. It's a gradual process that takes time. And that is exactly what Caitlyn Jenner explained.
I remember 15 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it was, when this whole gay marriage issue came up. At first, I was not for it. I mean, I thought, I'm a traditionalist. I'm older than most people in the audience, you know. I mean, I kind of like tradition, and, you know, it's always been a man and a woman. And I'm thinking, I don't quite get it. But as time has gone on, I think, like a lot of people on this issue, have really changed your thinking here. I don't ever want to stand in front of anybody's happiness.